D.B. Cooper, an unidentified man who hijacked Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 on November 24, 1971, in U.S. airspace, is a moniker coined by the media. During the flight from Portland, Oregon, to Seattle, Washington, he claimed to have a bomb, demanded $200,000 in ransom, equivalent to about $1,500,000 in 2024, and requested 4 parachutes upon landing in Seattle. After releasing the passengers, he instructed the crew to refuel for a flight to Mexico City, with a stop in Reno, Nevada. Approximately 30 minutes after departing Seattle, he opened the aft door, deployed the staircase, and parachuted into the night over southwestern Washington. He remains unidentified and uncaught. As part 6 of American Cases with the Most Shocking Outcomes, we will look into the crime continues to stand as the sole unsolved instance of air piracy in the annals of commercial aviation history. This is the case of D.B. Cooper. The man, who identified himself as Dan Cooper on his ticket, was described by eyewitnesses as a white male in his mid-40s, with dark hair and brown eyes, wearing a black or brown business suit, a white shirt, a thin black tie, a black raincoat, and brown shoes. Carrying a briefcase and a brown paper bag, he took seat 18E in the last row of the Boeing 727-100 aircraft. He ordered a bourbon and 7-Up from the flight attendant, but a reporter's mix-up of names led to the hijacker being referred to as D.B. Cooper. Flight 305 departed Portland on time at 2:50 p.m. with a crew of 6 individuals: Captain William A. Scott, First Officer William Bill J. Ratachzak, Flight Engineer Harold E. Anderson, and flight attendants Alice Hancock, Tina Mucklow, and Florence Schaffner. Along with 36 passengers, including Dan Cooper, the aircraft embarked on its journey. Shortly after departure, Dan Cooper, identified as Cooper, passed a note to flight attendant Schaffner, who was seated in the jump seat at the rear of the plane directly behind him. Initially assuming it to be a phone number, Schaffner placed the note unopened into her purse. Cooper then leaned towards her and quietly warned, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Schaffner reluctantly opened the note to find a clear message written in all capital letters, with a felt-tip pen. "Miss, I have a bomb in my briefcase, and want you to sit by me." Following Cooper's instructions, Schaffner returned the note and complied with his demand to sit beside him. She discreetly requested to see the bomb, prompting Cooper to open his briefcase. Inside, she observed 2 rows of 4 red cylinders connected to wires and a large cylindrical battery, creating the appearance of a bomb. Upon confirming Cooper's demands, Schaffner complied and began drafting a note as instructed by Cooper. Schaffner drafted a note detailing Cooper's demands, which she then delivered to the cockpit and briefed the flight crew on the situation. Upon receiving the information, Captain Scott instructed her to remain in the cockpit for the duration of the flight, tasked with documenting unfolding events. Meanwhile, Captain Scott contacted Northwest Flight Operations in Minnesota to relay the hijackers' demands: $200,000 in a knapsack, along with 2 front parachutes and 2 back parachutes, all in negotiable American currency. Cooper's request for 2 sets of parachutes suggested a plan to take a hostage, dissuading authorities from providing non-functional equipment. Pretty smart. With Schaffner stationed in the cockpit, flight attendant Mucklow took on the role of intermediary between Cooper and the flight crew. Cooper then issued further demands upon landing in Seattle. Fuel trucks were to meet the plane, passengers were to remain seated while the money was brought aboard by Schaffner, and he would release the passengers after receiving the ransom. The parachutes were to be the last items brought aboard. Captain Scott notified Seattle-Tacoma Airport Air Traffic Control of the situation, prompting them to alert local police and the FBI. Passengers were informed of a minor mechanical difficulty causing a delay in their arrival in Seattle. Donald Nierop, the president of Northwest Orient, authorized the payment of the ransom and instructed all employees to comply with the hijackers' demands. For approximately 2 hours, Flight 305 circled Puget Sound to allow Seattle police and the FBI to gather Cooper's ransom money and parachutes, as well as mobilize emergency personnel. During the flight from Portland to Seattle, Cooper insisted that Mucklow stays by his side continuously. She noted his familiarity with the local landscape, as he identified Tacoma and accurately pointed out McChord Air Force Base's proximity to SeaTac Airport. Despite the circumstances, Mucklow described Cooper as composed and not hostile. As the plane circled Seattle, Mucklow engaged in conversation with Cooper, inquiring about his choice of Northwest Airlines for the hijacking. He explained that it was not personal against the airline, but rather a decision based on convenience. When asked about his origins, Cooper became evasive. However, he shared admiration for Minnesota when Mucklow mentioned her residence there. He offered her a cigarette, which she accepted despite having quit smoking. The $200,000 ransom, consisting of unmarked $20 bills primarily issued by the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, with serial numbers starting with L, was delivered from Seattle First National Bank in a bag weighing around 19 pounds. The FBI documented the money on microfilm. At approximately 5:24 p.m., Captain Scott was informed of the delivery of the parachutes to the airport, signaling Cooper that they would soon land. Flight 305 touched down at Seattle-Tacoma Airport at 5:46 p.m. Following Cooper's instructions, Scott parked the aircraft on a partially lit runway away from the main terminal. Cooper specified that only one representative from the airline should approach with the parachutes and money, using the mobile air stairs for entry and exit through the aircraft's front door. Northwest Orient's Seattle operations manager, Al Lee, was assigned as the courier, changing into civilian attire to avoid being mistaken for law enforcement. Mucklow exited the aircraft through the front door, as directed by Cooper, retrieved the ransom money and returned it to him in the last row, passing by the seated passengers. Cooper finally agreed to release the passengers. As they disembarked, he carefully inspected the money. To lighten the mood, Mucklow jokingly asked if she could have some of the money. Surprisingly, Cooper agreed and handed her a packet of bills. However, Mucklow promptly returned the money, explaining that accepting gratuities was against company policy. She mentioned that Cooper had earlier attempted to tip her and the other flight attendants with money from his own pocket, but they had all declined, citing the policy. With the passengers safely off the aircraft, only Cooper and the 6 crew members remained on board. Following Cooper's instructions, Mucklow made 3 trips outside the aircraft to retrieve the parachutes, which she then brought to him in the rear of the plane. Meanwhile, Schaffner asked Cooper if she could retrieve her purse from a compartment behind his seat. Cooper agreed, reassuring her by saying, "I won't bite you." Upon Hancock's request, Cooper allowed both Schaffner and Hancock to disembark. When Mucklow brought the final parachute to Cooper, she provided him with printed instructions for using the parachutes. But he declined, stating that he didn't need them. A hiccup in the refueling process caused a delay, requiring 2 additional trucks to complete the refueling. During this time, Mucklow noted that Cooper complained about the money being delivered in a cloth bag instead of a knapsack as he had requested, forcing him to devise a new method for transporting the money. Using a pocket knife, he cut the canopy from one of the reserve parachutes and stuffed some of the money into the empty parachute bag. An FAA official requested a face-to-face meeting with Cooper on board the aircraft, but Cooper declined. Growing impatient, he urged everyone to speed up the process, emphasizing, "Let's get this show on the road." Cooper then provided the cockpit crew with his flight plan and specific directives: a southeast course toward Mexico City, maintaining the minimum airspeed possible without stalling the aircraft, approximately 100 knots or 185 kilometers, at a maximum altitude of 10,000 feet. He also specified that the landing gear must remain deployed, the wing flaps lowered by 15 degrees, and the cabin unpressurized. Upon learning that the configured aircraft had a limited range of approximately 1,000 miles, First Officer Ratakzak informed Cooper that a second refueling would be necessary before entering Mexico. After discussing options with the crew, they collectively agreed on Reno-Tahoe International Airport as the refueling stop. Cooper then directed the aircraft to take off with the rear exit door open and its air stair extended. Northwest's home office raised concerns about the safety of this configuration, but Cooper insisted, stating, "It can be done. Do it." Despite objections, he did not engage in further argument and agreed to lower the staircase once airborne. He demanded that Mucklow remain aboard to assist with the operation. At approximately 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 departed with only Cooper, Mucklow, Captain Scott, First Officer Ratajczak, and Flight Engineer Anderson on board. 2 F-106 fighters from McCord Air Force Base and a Lockheed T-33 trainer, diverted from an unrelated Air National Guard mission, followed the 727, maintaining flight patterns to remain behind and out of Cooper's view. Before departing, Mucklow pleaded with Cooper to take the bomb with him. Cooper assured her he would either disarm it or take it along. As Mucklow made her way to the cockpit and closed the curtain partition behind her, she glimpsed Cooper standing in the aisle, securing what appeared to be the money bag around his waist. Mucklow's entrance into the cockpit. Throughout the flight to Reno, Mucklow remained in the cockpit, ultimately becoming the last person to have seen the hijacker. Around 8:01 p.m., a warning light in the cockpit alerted the crew that the aft staircase had been deployed. The pilot used the cabin intercom to offer assistance to Cooper, receiving a terse response of, "No." The crew experienced ear-popping due to the drop in cabin air pressure resulting from the stairs being opened. At approximately 8:13 p.m., the aircraft's tail suddenly pitched upward, prompting the pilots to adjust and return the aircraft to level flight. According to co-pilot Bill Radatzak's FBI interview, this abrupt upward movement occurred near the northern suburbs of Portland. With the aft cabin door open and the staircase extended, the flight crew remained uncertain if Cooper was still on board. Mucklow used the cabin intercom to inform Cooper of their approach to Reno and the need to retract the stairs for a safe landing. Despite repeated requests during the final approach, neither Mucklow nor the flight crew received a response from the hijacker. At 11:02 p.m., with the aft staircase still deployed, Flight 305 landed at Reno Tahoe International Airport. Law enforcement personnel established a perimeter around the aircraft but refrained from approaching, fearing the presence of the hijacker and the bomb. Captain Scott conducted a cabin search, confirming Cooper's absence. After a 30-minute search, an FBI bomb squad declared the cabin safe. During the initial year of investigation, the FBI relied on eyewitness accounts from both passengers and flight crew to create sketches of Cooper. The first sketch, known as Composite A, was finalized shortly after the hijacking and made public on November 28, 1971. In 1980, a portion of the ransom money was discovered along the banks of the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington. While this find reignited public interest in the case, it failed to provide any new leads regarding the identity or fate of the hijacker. The remaining money was never recovered. For 45 years following the hijacking, the FBI conducted an active investigation, accumulating a substantial case file, but ultimately without reaching any definitive conclusions. The case stands as the sole unsolved instance of air piracy in commercial aviation history. The FBI speculates that Cooper likely did not survive his jump due to factors such as adverse weather conditions on the night of the hijacking, inadequate attire, and lack of proper skydiving equipment, the densely wooded terrain of his landing area, his apparent unfamiliarity with the landing site, and the unspent remainder of the ransom money. In July 2016, the FBI officially halted active investigation of the case. Yet journalists, enthusiasts, professional investigators, and amateur sleuths continue to explore various theories regarding Cooper's identity, success, and ultimate fate. Cooper's hijacking, along with subsequent imitations in the following year, prompted significant enhancements to airport and commercial aviation security measures. Metal detectors were installed, baggage inspections became mandatory, and passengers purchasing tickets with cash on the day of departure were subject to additional scrutiny. Boeing 727 aircraft were retrofitted with Cooper vanes, specifically designed to prevent the deployment of the aft staircase during flight. By 1973, incidents of aircraft hijackings had notably decreased as a result of these enhanced security measures deterring individuals motivated solely by monetary gain. Before we wrap up, case number 6. The following information that is important to the case to further understand the extent of the investigation that went into it. Alongside the discovery of 66 latent fingerprints on the airliner, FBI agents recovered several items belonging to Cooper, including his black clip-on tie clip, and 2 of the 4 parachutes, one of which had been opened with 3 shroud lines cut from the canopy. Extensive interviews with eyewitnesses in Portland, Seattle, and Reno led to the development of a series of composite sketches. Local police and FBI agents promptly initiated inquiries into potential suspects. Exploring the notion that the hijacker might have used his real name or a consistent alias, Portland police located and interviewed a local citizen named D.B. Cooper. who had a minor police record. However, this individual was swiftly ruled out as a suspect. The challenging task of defining the search area was complicated by numerous variables, including varying jet airspeed estimates, fluctuating environmental conditions along the flight path relative to the aircraft's location and altitude, and the unknown duration of Cooper's free fall before deploying his parachute. The Air Force F-106 pilots neither observed anyone jumping nor detected a deployed parachute on their radar. The difficulty of spotting a black-clad individual on a moonless night, given limited visibility, cloud cover, and the absence of ground lighting, added to the complexity. In a controlled recreation using the same aircraft and flight configuration as the hijacking, FBI agents pushed a 200-pound sled out of the open-air stair, successfully reproducing the upward motion of the tail section, and a brief change in cabin pressure reported by the flight crew at 8:13 p.m. Initial estimations placed Cooper's potential landing zone in an area on the southernmost extent of Mount St. Helens, a few miles southeast of Ariel, Washington, near Lake Merwin, an artificial lake formed by a dam on the Lewis River. Search efforts concentrated on Clark and Cowlitz counties, covering the terrain immediately south and north of the Lewis River in southwest Washington. FBI agents and sheriff's deputies conducted extensive searches on foot and by helicopter through the densely wooded terrain, while patrol boats combed Lake Merwin and Yale Lake. Despite these efforts, neither Cooper nor any of the presumed equipment he carried were located. In Seat 18E, where Cooper had been seated, FBI agents discovered a black clip-on necktie. Attached to the tie was a gold tie clip featuring a circular mother-of-pearl setting in the center. Further investigation revealed that this particular tie had been exclusively sold at JCPenney department stores, but had been discontinued in 1968. By late 2007, the FBI had managed to construct a partial DNA profile from samples obtained from Cooper's tie in 2001. However, the FBI also acknowledged that there was no conclusive evidence linking Cooper to the source of the DNA sample. FBI Special Agent Fred Gutt remarked, "The tie had 2 small DNA samples and 1 large sample. It's challenging to draw definitive conclusions from these samples." Additionally, the FBI released previously undisclosed evidence, including Cooper's plane ticket, composite sketches, and fact sheets. They also issued a public request for information regarding Cooper's identity. On February 10, 1980, 8-year-old Brian Ingram was enjoying a family vacation on the Columbia River at Tina, or Tina Bar, approximately 9 miles downstream from Vancouver, Washington, and 20 miles southwest of Ariel. While raking the sandy riverbank to prepare for a campfire, he stumbled upon 3 packets of the ransom cash, totaling around $5,800. Despite significant deterioration due to prolonged exposure to the elements, the bills were still bundled together with rubber bands. FBI technicians confirmed that the money was indeed a portion of the ransom, comprising 2 packets of $120 bills each and a third packet of 90, arranged in the same order as when given to Cooper. This discovery sparked numerous speculations and raised more questions than answers. Initial assessments by investigators and scientific experts operated under the assumption that the bundled bills had washed into the Columbia River from one of its many connecting tributaries. An Army Corps of Engineers hydrologist observed that the bills had disintegrated in a manner consistent with being deposited by river action, rather than deliberately buried, as they appeared rounded and matted together. This finding supported the hypothesis that Cooper had landed near the Washougal River, which merges with the Columbia upstream from the discovery site, rather than in or near Lake Merwin, the Lewis River, or any downstream tributaries. However, the free-floating hypothesis failed to explain the absence of 10 bills from 1 packet or how the 3 packets remained together after separating from the rest of the money. Additionally, physical evidence contradicted geological findings, as free-floating bundles should have washed up on the bank within a few years of the hijacking, and the rubber bands should have deteriorated over time. Geological evidence indicated that the bills arrived at Tina Bar after a Corps of Engineers dredging operation in 1974, suggesting a later arrival than initially presumed. Further analysis conducted in late 2020, focusing on diatoms found on the bills, indicated that the bundles found at Tina Bar were not submerged in the river or buried dry at the time of the hijacking in November 1971. Only diatoms that typically bloom during springtime were found, suggesting that the money entered the water at least several months after the hijacking. In 1986, the recovered bills were divided equally between Brian Ingram and Northwest Orient's insurer, Royal Globe Insurance, while the FBI retained 14 examples as evidence. Ingram later sold 15 of his bills at auction in 2008 for approximately $37,000, equivalent to $50,000 in 2022. The Columbia River ransom money remains the sole confirmed physical evidence from the hijacking found outside the aircraft. On July 8, 2016, the FBI declared a suspension of an active investigation into the Cooper case, citing the necessity to allocate investigative resources and personnel toward matters of greater urgency and priority. However, local field offices would continue to receive any legitimate physical evidence specifically related to the parachutes or ransom money that may surface in the future. The comprehensive 66-volume case file amassed over the 45-year investigation would be preserved for historical purposes at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., as well as accessible on the FBI website. All evidence related to the case remains accessible to the public. This crime continues to stand as the sole unsolved instance of air piracy in the annals of commercial aviation history. Why do you think the rest of the money was never used? And do you believe that Cooper survived his mission or not?